Deaths in custody at the hands of others. A death in custody is a generic term which refers to deaths of those in custody of the state. A non-fatal shooting or severe and extensive injury is not sufficient. There must be death. However, a death in a road traffic incident, even if the person who dies is under arrest and heading towards a police station in a police car, is not a death in custody. The deceased must have been in custody. The following list illustrates some circumstances that may apply to this definition. All deaths in custody cases are handled and prosecuted by Special Crime and Counter-Terrorism Division in London or York. The definition of murder is the unlawful killing of a reasonable person under the Queen's peace with malice aforethought. The case of Cunningham found that the intention to cause grievous bodily harm is sufficient.
We are now going to look at some information on deaths in custody. In the USA, on average 4,400 people die a year in prisons, whereas in the UK, according to the Ministry of Justice, from 1978 to 2017, on average only 138 people die a year in prison. These may not all be in the hands of others, but shows the fact that the UK is a lot better in terms of prison safety than the USA. However, these stats cover all deaths in custody, not just those in the hands of others. For deaths in the hands of others, the average in the UK per year in the last 40 years has been 1.925. However, this has shown a rise in the past 5 years, where the average has risen to 4.2 per year. This shows there may be a recent issue over how safe our prison system is, as has been reported in the media.
We will now look at when an individual murders another inmate whilst in custody. This would go against the theory of retributism, which is that the wrongful offender deserves punishment for the annulment of crime. This is completely undermined as the offender is not being punished if they are committing further offences whilst in prison. Looking at the Criminal Justice Act 2003, section 142, there are 5 purposes to sentencing an offender. These purposes are undermined when the individual commits murder whilst in custody. They are evidently not being deterred from crime, which consequently means that the punishment of the offender is not working. This would also mean that they are not successfully rehabilitated during their custodial sentence. They may at this point be treated as beyond rehabilitation. Furthermore, the offender who is wrongfully murdered will not be rehabilitated successfully themselves, as they are not given the opportunity to become reformed in prison as their life is cut short. This is completely unfair and goes against the protection of society. Deterrence is also undermined, as the purpose of punishment is to get people to conform their behaviour to the dictates of law by ensuring that non-conformity will cause them more pain than conformity will give them pleasure. Specific deterrence is compromised, as the punishment intended to discourage a specific individual offender from committing crime again in the future has not been successful. More broadly, general deterrence is undermined, as it does not deter society from being given custodial sentences if they feel they can commit such heinous crimes in prison itself. This is a collateral consequence. However, it could be argued that this would generally deter people from offending, as they are deterred from going to prison itself due to homicides being committed in them. Here comes into play prisonisation, which is the process by which inmates adapt to prison society, the taking on the ways, mores, custom and general culture of peniarity. In custody, where murders are committed, this creates a criminal atmosphere for the inmates. Issues of overpopulation in prisons could be another factor that plays into prisonisation. This could also tie into Sutherland's differential association theory, which depicts that offending behaviour is a consequence of increasing association with people who have pro-criminal attitudes, which affects both individuals' attitudes towards crime and provides opportunity for learning about how to be more successful at committing crimes. The study of Laetitia v. Lowenkamp concluded that low-risk offenders with high-risk offenders makes it more likely that low-risk offenders will re-offend. This perhaps suggests why some prisoners are committing further offences whilst in custody. Perhaps they are influenced to murder by their peers. Could create a university of crime by putting young, inexperienced criminals into prison environment with older, more experienced criminals. This may mean that the type of education these youngsters get is not necessarily the type we would want. The victim of the death in custody at the hands of others has suffered a failure of the criminal aim of the principle of welfare, which protects society from harm. For an individual to be autonomous and free to pursue goals, they must be protected from those who may unfairly interfere with them. Therefore, the person murdered is unfairly interfered with.
Sometimes deaths in custody are due to the enforcement officers themselves, not other inmates. This could be due to the fact that officers, when in their roles, conform to the idea that they are superior over the prisoner, especially in a tough prison environment. This was a finding in Zimbardo's infamous Stanford prison experiment, in which even normal people, when put in the roles of prisoner guards, were abusive towards the mock prisoners. This shows that enforcement officers may not always do what they should be doing, which is protecting the prisoners, but are instead the causes of their deaths. On screen, we have two examples of officers causing deaths of inmates in the UK. In both cases, the prisoners were restrained to such a level by the officers they eventually died from their injuries. This shows that enforcement officers do sometimes take the protection of the public too far, and use such force on prisoners that it causes their deaths. From this, we can conclude that the safety of prisons is not as it should be, and this is not helped by those who are supposed to make it safe, the prison officers.
Found that the most vulnerable group are men. There have been no homicides in women in the last 40 years in the UK in comparison to 77 males. This could perhaps be due to the notion that judges tend to give women less harsher custodial sentence, so that therefore the majority of the prison population tend to be male. Another theory for this statistic is that males have more of the hormone testosterone, so therefore have a higher tendency to be aggressive, which could consequently cause more violence in prison between them when they are in more of a suffocating environment. In addition to gender, age is also a factor in this. The most vulnerable group being killed whilst in custody are those aged between 25 and 49, the most vulnerable being 30 to 39. This shows that it might not be the first-time offenders that are most at risk of offending, as they would be likely to be younger, but those who have offended before and are entering prison again. Also, those who have committed more heinous crimes are more likely to be in this age bracket, having offended before, so are more likely to be targets of attacks due to the nature of their crimes.
In conclusion, our prison system may not be as effective as we think at reducing crime and preventing reoffending. This is due to the fact that prisons themselves can facilitate offending. This has been shown through our statistics that show that deaths in custody in the hands of others are on the rise. The fact that the purposes of sentencing from Section 142 of the Criminal Justice Act 2003 are being compromised also hinders the effectiveness of prisons. We have also shown that prison is not the perfect place for rehabilitation. This has been done using Sutherland's differential association theory and through the notion of prisonisation, that custody can be seen as a university of crime where new offending techniques can be learnt. This therefore shows that prisons may be made out to be a place of rehabilitation and reform, but this does not always happen.